Well, building a better rail network, that's the pitch from the Biden administration as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And funding and projects are now in motion with a big win for inner city passenger rails. And that's just happened for people in the Northeast. And Chief Transportation Correspondent Hawker Vanguard is here. First, let's talk about that. What exactly do when we say inner city passenger rails, what is that?
So inner city means I'm getting on a train, maybe here in Charlotte, and headed up to Washington, D.C. So it's taking me from city to city within the United States, but not the same thing as getting on a train from Charlotte and going to Raleigh.
Okay, so we could see that here.
Right, and we have some of that service now, but what we're trying to do is make that more easily accessible for everybody now. So here's what happened in the Northeast, though. CSX and the smaller rail line that they manage, the Pan Am line, well, they agreed to allow Amtrak to operate trains along their route. And this opens up the possibility for more inner-city Amtrak trains to run from Massachusetts west through New York State and then connecting beyond to Chicago and then California. So if you're wondering, what does this have to do with Charlotte, Southeast, Atlanta, this whole region? It means that CSX, the freight railroad there, is making an effort to work with Amtrak to open up their rail lines for use. It's not common to see freight railroads do this all the time because there's agreements that are already in place. So them being able to host new Amtrak trains is kind of a big deal.
All right, so if the, just to kind of put this into perspective for everybody, if the freight railroads basically call the shots, can Amtrak just travel over any of those tracks?
So not just because they feel like it. There has to be some type of agreement already in place. So this is a new agreement, even though CSX works with Amtrak currently in other regions. But what we're dealing with here is the certification of passenger trains to run at higher speeds on those tracks. So the freight trains, they're maintained at a certain level when it comes to those trackage, and the tracks that we're working with now are class 3, which means a maximum speed limit of 60 miles an hour. So that's what a freight train would run over. But it's desirable for a passenger train to use class 4 or 80-mile-an-hour track, but Amtrak would have to foot the bill. So that's where that back and forth with CSX comes into play. They have to pay to bring that rail up into compliance. But second of all, it's the schedule. Amtrak doesn't get to call the shots. Like you said, they kind of have to work with the freight train schedule. And that's when we can see passenger train delays and then just upset passengers.
Okay, so the last question I have for you is, what does this mean for me? If I live here in the Carolinas, does this mean that does this cost me more money? Does this mean that I could be able to have more access? What does this whole thing mean?
So thankfully, it doesn't mean any increase in taxes, because those grants go just for the trains that would transport us from city-state to city-state, so Charlotte to Raleigh. But what we're going to see is increased availability for trains in the whole Southeast, connecting us down to Atlanta, and then hopefully up to Boston on publicly used railway systems.